So good morning and welcome to Reflection Skills. This is a webinar with Cambridge Marketing College and I am Neil Wilkins. If this is the first session that you've been to, a big welcome to you. If this is something that you have been part of this series, and we have a lot of webinars in this series, then welcome back. It's great to see you again. This is the penultimate webinar in this series. Today, obviously, we're here to talk about reflection skills. And the final one will be at the same time next Friday, the 17th of December. And that will be on the topic of self-motivation. And what a great way to end the year, really sort of kick-starting ourselves as we move into 2022. The topics that we've been covering have kind of built a little bit of a momentum, if you like, in terms of professional and personal development as we've moved through this series. And for me, it's been a really interesting journey. We've kind of interspersed, professional, technical things within marketing with some of the core skills, really, and core kind of ways of thinking about developing yourself personally that can really push forward yourself within your career, but also in your personal and private life as well, because a lot of these things are very transferable over to everyday living. And I think for me that's been one of the most interesting things that we've been exploring, and very much part of today's topic, which is reflection skills. So we're going to move forward into this topic because it is something that really I think a lot of people can really kind of benefit from. They may well be doing some of the things we've been talking about before, emotional intelligence and empathy, looking to become more resilient, looking to become more flexible and creative, all those amazing things in terms of personal development. But you can only really do those things if you self-reflect. So let's begin today by really focusing in on a number of definitions, if you like, of self-reflection. And for me, this is always a good point to start these kinds of conversations, because if you don't really have a clarity over where you're beginning, then it's very difficult to know what the journey is going to be. So let's kind of reflect a little bit to start with on what self-reflection is. Okay, so initially, self-reflection is a concept that will, in theory, help you to balance who you are now with who you want to be. Okay, so it kind of takes a context of how you've literally moved in your life journey to this point here today, and then helps you to begin to shape a future that's going to work for you. Okay, and as we'll see as we go through this session, it is a lot about reflecting and understanding the why, not the what or the how, but the why behind the decisions that you take, both professionally and personally, the behaviors that you exhibit in a very natural way, or maybe at times in a forced kind of way, and the way then that those sort of thoughts and those behaviors impact on actually how you feel, both emotionally and physically. So this is very much an interesting kind of almost departure from everyday life for a lot of us, because very few of us actually take time to properly self-reflect and kind of figure out the why. What is it that kind of drives us? What is it that motivates us to make a certain choice or a certain decision or behave in a certain way in a certain scenario? And truly knowing yourself and truly kind of really self-reflecting and really understanding some of those motivations and those reasons why will give you a lot of self-power, and in many senses a sense of calmness when tackling all of the challenges of everyday life. Because when you have a strong sense of self and you really understand what we mean by self, and then you truly know the values and the motivations and the triggers and the kind of the sensibility that comes from within you, then you shouldn't really have to hesitate going forward to make any kind of decision. Everything should be really super clear. So self-reflection allows you to make decisions and to behave in a way with almost sort of ultimate confidence. And again, as we say, this can appear and this can manifest in a physical sense, in an emotional sense, and certainly within the thought processes that you go through, both in work and in leisure time as well. So self-reflection itself then is your ability to witness and evaluate the way that you think, the way that you feel, and the way that you behave. So from a psychological perspective, your cognitive sense, your emotional sense, and your behaviors. So we're looking here at thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And if you've listened to previous sessions or you've been part of sort of previous broadcasts, you'll understand that this whole idea of cognitive behavioral theory comes into a lot of the things that we do. So this interplay, this interreaction between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors really is at the core of successful and enjoyable self-reflection. So from a psychology perspective, you might, if you Google this or do some research on this, you might see it called a number of other things. And this whole idea of self-observing, taking time out to observe, well, why did I do that? Why did I feel that? Or why did I make that decision? Not the what or the how, but why? This self-observation can often be called reflective awareness or reflective consciousness. And a lot of this comes from the original work from William James, who was a psychologist back at the end of the 19th century. And he spent a lot of his life devoting time and energy to kind of try to figure out this really, really fundamental interrelationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And we're going to explore some of those in this session to get a little bit more of a detailed understanding of the building blocks of self-reflection before we begin to explore some of the techniques that we can bring into our everyday work life and our everyday personal life. So William James came up in essence really with a theory that said that psychology itself, the core building blocks of psychology, are the study of the causes, conditions, and immediate consequences of states of consciousness. In other words, understanding that you yourself are an entity at play in the world around you, and that certain things might trigger you, certain things might stimulate you to make a decision or act in a certain way, and that all of those behaviors and those thoughts and those emotions will have consequences. Okay, so the consequence of self-reflection is that ultimately you get a little bit more of a sense of kind of ownership of yourself and ownership of the world around you. Now, what I'm not looking here to talk about here is anything like control. Okay, so we're not talking about control of others, control of situations. We're not looking at manipulation. We're not looking at any of those sort of, well, you could describe them as kind of darker topics that might come out of the ultimate, definition here. What we're talking about here is the ability to go within yourself, to understand the why. So it's the why within you of your choices, of your reactions to things that happen around you, and your choices of how you're going to behave in a certain scenario. So as you can see, when we talk about psychology, this is really, really the fundamental part of how we as human beings begin to interact with the world around us. And this is really the starting point, if you like, of self-reflection. Because until we actually understand self, we can't reflect on self. So this is the kind of the starting point for us. So to be able to self-reflect and understand why we make the choices and behave the way we do, we need to start to define self first, because until we've defined self, we can't actually reflect within self. So I'm being a little bit pedantic here, but it is really, really important to begin here at this point, because otherwise all we do is we start to sit there and think, okay, well, that's kind of what I did, and why did I do that? And, it's kind of very, very surface. We need to go deeper. And that's what we'll do. And we'll talk about some techniques that will allow you to take the time and the accountability for going deeper within yourself to really understand what is going on. So I want to introduce you to two concepts that are going to become really important as we go through this topic. And these two concepts are ego and self-esteem. Okay, you've got the word self in there again. And self really comes into ego. Now, when I use the word ego, I want to define ego for you in just a minute, because to me, the word ego has been really, really misinterpreted over the, sort of recent decades. And I think people would often say, oh, that person's got a big ego. And that would mean, from their perspective, that, oh, this person is really full of themselves. But actually, that's a misnomer. That is actually an incorrect definition of the word ego. We all have ego, okay? And ego is your sense of self. So your ego is something that says, I am an entity, I am a consciousness, I am a thing, I am a set of chemical reactions, I am a set of behaviors and choices, I might even be a physical body, but actually we're not going to talk about that yet. This is something that's going on in my mind or my heart. But the ego allows you to identify with being you. Okay, so your ego allows you to kind of recognize that actually, I am not the world around me. I'm not that other person. I am me. Okay, so the ego allows you to make that differentiation so that you can kind of see that you are something. Okay, and the self-esteem is the term that's used to describe your overall subjective, and it is very subjective because you might be right, but you might be wrong. Your subjective sense of personal worth or value that your ego provides to the world around you. Okay, so verywellmind.com define this really quite nicely. The term self-esteem is used to describe a person's overall subjective sense of personal worth or value. So before we even start reflecting on self and actually figuring out what's going on in our heads and our minds and our feelings, we've got to really sort of understand actually where we're starting from. So this idea of self-esteem, I just want you to think about this for a moment, is if I ask you the question, do you have a strong or maybe weak self-esteem? Do you have a self-esteem that you would feel? And again, this is your perceived subjective sense of personal worth or value to the world around you. Would you say for you personally, and you don't want to tell anybody else this is all about you, so you can be really brutally honest with yourself if you can. Would you say that your self-esteem is strong, or could it do with boosting a little bit? Now, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to say, oh, you can improve your self-esteem. It's what it is right here, right now, and that is fine. You are coming from a state of, being in a great place, whether you think it's great or not. The fact you're even here thinking about this right now puts you in a really great, strong position. So ego is your sense of being you, and your self-esteem is how you use that sense of being you on a scale or on a spectrum to rate your overall sense of personal worth or value. In other words, how much you can provide to the world around you. And also, interestingly, to yourself, because this is also self-esteem. So how do you feel about yourself? The value that you give to yourself. Are you comfortable? People often say this, are you comfortable in your own skin? Do you feel happy with yourself? So we're using this word self a lot. So we're going to explore this a little bit more before we get to the point of being able to learn some techniques for self-reflecting. We've got to get deeper and deeper into this idea of self first, because this is really important. So self-esteem is how we value and perceive ourselves. It's based on our opinions and beliefs about ourselves. In other words, actually, how we then compare to the values that we've either been brought up with through our childhood and sort of our early lives. We actually form sets of values, and often through our parents and our siblings and, the influential people in our early life. They will sort of help us to set some values. And then our self-esteem is comparing those values with actually who we are today, the kind of person that we are, the kind of world that we kind of live in and interact in. And these are all quite subjective because there is no right or wrong. And in fact, actually in self-reflection, in the whole concept of ego and self-esteem, there is no right or wrong. There just is what there is. So there's this lovely sort of comfort zone almost that you can sort of fall into and bask in, knowing that actually you're absolutely perfect right here, right now as you are. All we're doing here is just exploring what it is, exploring the why, exploring opportunities maybe for going forward to maybe just tune things and then see what happens. We're not here to judge. We're not here to say, oh, my self-esteem is low. I'm not going to rate it particularly highly because I see this person over there. And when I compare myself to them, I don't feel as though my self-esteem is high. Well, that's not what this is about. This is about looking at self-esteem. So it's about rating yourself against yourself. And it's not about judging, it's just about being really true and authentic to yourself to see where you might take this. Now, of course, people who have a healthy ego, and I'm not talking about people who are full of themselves and this kind of misnomer of the way we define ego. This is about a sense of self. So people who have a healthy sense of self allow themselves to genuinely appreciate their strengths, accept their imperfections, and actually, at a fundamental level, love themselves unconditionally. Okay, it's a lovely, lovely quote from coachcampus.com. Healthy ego allows us to genuinely appreciate our strengths, accept our imperfections, and love ourselves unconditionally. And that is weaknesses and failings and faults and, everything like that and all. Okay, so we're just kind of unconditionally accepting we are who we are. So when you see somebody and you think, my goodness, they're so self-confident, they're so kind of assured, they're so comfortable in their skin, they have a healthy ego or acceptance of who they are. Now, it may be that this person has actually spent quite a bit of time self-reflecting, in other words, understanding the why of their motivations and the why of what's going on. But they might not. They might just have subconsciously got themselves into that situation. And, that is, again, just what it is. We're not here to judge. We're not here to say they're better people because they can do this, or that because they have this strong self-esteem, they've figured out the value they give to themselves and the world around them. Wow, aren't they a great person? We're not here to say that. What we're here to do is say there is this really, really important thing of self-identity before we can self-reflect. And there is this important thing of self-esteem, understanding the value you provide to yourself and the world around you before you can self-reflect. So ego is identifying with you, that you are you and you are different to everything that exists around you in your world. And self-esteem, the value that will bring to the world around you. So we're starting here with a couple of building blocks that kind of gets us moving forward. Now, you may have come across the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I just want to kind of put this idea of ego and self-esteem into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a tried and tested sort of baseline framework, if you like, for how our motivations, arrive in our world, and kind of the things that trigger us, the things that kind of we feel as being super important and that almost like drive our every sort of day of being. And the very, very base of Maslow's hierarchy is the physical need, the need for literally food, air and water and rest and health and just the physical being, if you like. That is great. We have to begin there because obviously if we don't have a physical entity, i.e. our body, to actually live in, then naturally, self-reflection is not really going to work because we're not physically here necessarily. So that is a baseline. And we know that there is a need for that. That's the kind of the starting building block. Above that comes in the hierarchy comes the need for security, safety, shelter, and stability. So when you're thinking about the kinds of decisions that you make and the kind of motivations that you have, you're all driven about, oh goodness, no, where's the next dollar or the next pound coming from? Because I've got to put food on the table, or I've got to be able to put fuel in the boiler at home to keep us warm. And if that is where your motivation is, and if that is the kind of the sole kind of purpose that you feel you have, you could potentially be missing out on some amazing self-reflection at a higher level that allows you to maybe just tick those boxes and move to the next level. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next level up in Maslow's hierarchy is the social need, the need for being loved and belonging and inclusion. Now, of course, the word social has taken on a whole new meaning over the last 20 years with social media. And so we can see social in a physical sense, day to day, but we can also see it in a digital or virtual sense. But in the hierarchy of needs, it's there, our need for belonging. So when we self-reflect and think about actually what really drives us, are we being driven by social need, a need for being loved? So when we make decisions at work, maybe, are we looking for affirmation that I'm doing a good job? Please, line manager or boss, tell me I'm great, because you're looking for this kind of need to be appreciated and to be loved. Or are you looking for belonging and inclusion? Oh, I have to join that society in my local town because, or that community group, because I just need to be part of something. I'm not saying it in such a voice that means that's not a good thing to do. I'm not here to judge. But what I'm saying is actually, where are your motivations coming from? Are they coming from a physical or security basis, or are they coming from a more social basis? Because when you start to self-reflect and understand why I make certain decisions, where is the fuel coming from for those decisions or those behaviors? And if it is coming from a social perspective, the need for being loved or belonging or inclusion, well, that might be interesting in terms of figuring out why do I behave in a certain way? Why do I feel in a certain situation like this? Starts to give us a little bit more empowerment over what's going on. Next level up in the hierarchy of needs, above physical, security, and social, is ego. And this is where the need for self-esteem, and according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there are many versions of this, a lot of these models will include the need for power, the need for recognition, and the need for prestige. Now, I'm going to question that. I'm going to challenge that and say that's not what we're talking about. So I'm going to say that actually at the ego level, it is about an understanding of self, understanding of our place in the world around us. So I'm not looking here to say it's because I want to be better than you, or I need to be more successful than you in terms of how I would define who I am as I self-reflect on, how far I've come in my life. That's not, to me, what ego is in the hierarchy of needs. To me, ego at this level is making decisions based on an understanding of where and how I fit. And of course, because self-esteem is involved here, it's where I fit and the value that I add. Now, if you're already starting to make decisions on a day-to-day basis and you're making choices based around the value that you're adding, you're operating at the ego level in the hierarchy of needs. And that is a good thing. Okay, so I'm not here to say, oh, ego is bad, you don't want a big ego. That's not the definition we're using here. Ego is sense of self. And then at the top of the hierarchy of needs, this is really the top of the pyramid. If you've seen this model before, you'll know kind of what it looks like, is the concept of self-actualization. And ultimately, really, that is what we're here to talk about here today, self-actualization, the need for ongoing continuous development, creativity, and personal improvement. But interestingly, when you get to that point in the journey, and if you feel that actually I'm not about feeling my social way in the world, I'm not about, developing my sense of individuality in my ego, I'm actually now about continuously looking inside and actually developing myself as a human being and adding more and more value to the world around me, I feel like I'm self-actualized, then actually you come to a very, very interesting place. Because what you realize when you get to that level is that actually none of this really matters at all. And there's a certain irony in that. We can surround all of this with a huge number of theories and lots of kind of information and templates and checklists and to-do lists and actions and this, that, and the other. And none of it really, at the end of the day, matters. Because ultimately, all that matters is that you identify that you are on a journey, that it's a continuous improvement, that you can, if you stop and pause and listen to yourself and understand your motivations and the why in everything that you do, none of the rest, none of the definitions, none of this fancy language really matters. And that really, when it comes to self-actualization and that penny drops or that dime drops and you suddenly think, that's it. It is simple. It isn't complex. It is really, really quite easy to do. Once you realize that moment, then anything, absolutely anything then becomes possible. And what you've done is you've opened up your mind to infinite possibilities. Deepak Chopra talks a lot about infinite possibilities. You know, a lot of people in psychology and spirituality talk about this a lot, this whole idea of infinite possibilities. And they come when you allow yourself to identify that you are an entity, so you have an ego, but then you allow yourself, you give yourself time and energy to just stop, just pause, and allow yourself to go inward and experience whatever is in there. Okay, and I'll come on to some techniques for looking at that and doing that in just a moment. But what you'll find when you get to this point in the journey, so you've identified that you've got an ego, so you are an entity, you are a thing, you are a unique individual, you've got some self-esteem, so you know a little bit about the value that you're adding to the world around you and to yourself. Then you start to realize, well, actually, okay, so what is doing this thinking? What is actually figuring all of this out? You know, is it this kind of consciousness, or is it this kind of thought process, or kind of what is it? Well, Freud, you know, one of the great grandfathers of modern psychology, did a lot, and again, literally a lifetime of investigation into what we called psychoanalysis. In other words, he looked into getting to know your mind. And of course, we have to get to know our mind and the way it's interacting, and kind of some of the little sort of thought patterns that as we begin to go on this journey of self-reflection will crop up. If you start to do things like meditation and progressive relaxation, and we'll talk about that later, you notice very, very quickly that you have what a lot of people describe as the monkey mind, monkey chatter. So you go into this kind of really calm and potentially meditative space, and you sit there and you think, oh, this is nice. I feel lovely and relaxed and calm, and I'm ready to self-reflect. And then your mind cuts in and says, hold on a minute, you didn't do that task, or you know what you're going to be doing next, or oh yeah, I forgot to do that, or and it starts chattering. And this was what Freud investigated at a very deep level, were the reasons both in the conscious mind, but also the subconscious and unconscious mind, as to why was there this chatter happening. And again, just having at this level an appreciation as we begin to self-reflect that your mind is going to try and defeat you on this one. Your mind is going to say, hey, hold on a minute. You're going into self-reflection moment. Okay, I'm going to chat to you. I'm going to try and put you off. Well, the nice thing to know is that it isn't all of your mind, okay? And there is a way through this, and we'll explore that in a moment. But what Freud came up with was the fact that your mind, he believed, was broken into kind of three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. So I'm going to give you a little example here just before we kind of get into what those things are and kind of how you can begin to use them in self-reflection. So Freud said that basically your id is your kind of most sort of native, your most sort of innate part of your mind. So as an example, here from psychpoint.com is a really nice little example. So id would say, as you're thinking about something, hey, it's all yours. Forget about your brother. Keep it all for yourself. Ego would say, I know mum gave me this candy to share with my brother. We should probably split it evenly. And then the superego part of your brain will say, you know that candy, and you know that your brother loves candy, well, you should probably give it all to him and not be greedy. So these are three kind of little tussles that your mind will be having. And as you go through choices, you'll probably recognize this, that id is giving you the facts, is giving you the, hey, look, there's an opportunity, take it, it's all yours. And the ego says, hey, hold on a minute, that's not really very fair, is it? What we need to do is probably think in a little bit of a sensible way about the impacts and kind of what might happen here if we just take it all for ourselves. So there's a little bit of a rational thing going on here. And the superego says, oh, well, in a perfect world, the ideal situation would be, let's just give that thing away, because then I'll be viewed in this lovely way and everybody around me will love me. And the ego says, hey, hold on a minute though. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You could be giving away something really important here that you need to survive. And the id says, yeah, take it, it's all yours. Superego says, yeah, but that doesn't matter because everybody will love me and I'll feel really great and really altruistic and oh, it'll be wonderful. And the ego says, oh, hold on a minute, guys, hold on a minute. So do you see what's happening here? There's this kind of little sort of dance that's going on. And this is a simple example of a piece of candy that your mum's given you and your brother wanted it. And it's kind of like, so who's going to make the decision? Is it going to be the id where it's all about you? Is it going to be the ego says, well, there's a bit of a compromise to do here? Or is it the super ego which says, we must give it away because it's the nice thing to do and it's this idealistic scenario that we're seeking? It's complicated. Self-reflection isn't all about sitting, out in the wilderness, in the sort of lotus pose and just, going into this wonderful state of Zen. You will find challenges as you begin to self-reflect. So the reason I'm talking to you about this whole idea about getting to know your mind is that when you face the chatter, you'll understand that there are parts of your mind that are kind of debating, they're kind of jousting for attention. And once you know this stuff, you know where your motivation is coming from. Not that it's right or wrong, but that the motivation then gives you some ability to be able to understand the why I do things the way I do, why I think about the things the way I do. So let's just delve a little bit more deeply into this id, ego, super ego. So imagine your mind, your brain, your thinking in three different kind of blocks, if you like. So the id, okay, so this is, or you could describe this as the child part of your brain. So it's the primitive, unconscious mind, and it's designed for basic motivations and urges to satisfy what's called the pleasure principle, and it has no social constraints. Okay, so the id is very much the inherent part of your ego. It's kind of the inherent part of you. It's the bit that says it's all about you, self-protection, decisions made just for my benefit. Okay, so there's no social context to it at all. And if you're this kind of person who makes decisions in that way, then that's what it is. I'm not here to judge, but there will be consequences of making decisions in that way. The ego, this is the kind of the facilitator, if you like, part of your mind. So this is the second bit, and this is the subconscious. This is the reality part of your mind, and it will help you to make decisions based on a social or a kind of a voice of reason. So it takes the situation or the context or the scenario or the opportunity, and it doesn't just say, it's all mine, I want to survive, I'm going to take it for me, which is what the id would want to do. The ego says, now hold on a minute, we've got to take a little bit of time here to kind of figure out some of the consequences. Let's look at what might happen if. So it allows you to kind of storytell a little bit, what would happen if I make this decision or I behave in this way? And also it starts to think, well, how would I feel if I did it that way, or I thought that way, or I chose that way? What are the impacts? What are the likely outcomes? And then the third part of the mind, which is the other end of the spectrum. So can you see what we're building here? We're building a spectrum. At one end is the id, right in the middle is the negotiator, the facilitator is your ego. And then at the far end, the other end from the id is the super ego. And this is the idealistic conscious, if you like. This is the bit that sort of is based on socially what you should do, that awful word should. Who says what you should do? Well, your super ego does. It's basically looking for perfection here. This is the area where you kind of give in to social norms. You kind of give maybe a little bit too much away of yourself. And if you're an empath, remember when we talked about empathy in one of the previous sessions, we talked about losing your energy. This is where people are making decisions based on super ego. They're giving maybe possibly a little bit too much of themselves away. Id would not allow you to do that. Id would say, hold on a minute, this is all about you, protect yourself first. Ego says, yeah, but there's a consequence by doing that. Super ego says, no, but it would be lovely if we did it like that. And your mind, as you get to know your mind, is having this joust subconsciously most of the time, because a lot of this operates without you even knowing, because the primitive id is unconscious. Okay, this is going to be your basic pleasure principle drive. It's going to happen whether you like it or not, and you can't control that. The subconscious, the ego, is the bit that hopefully with self-reflection we're going to begin to tap into, and it is this lovely ability to then become a little bit more self-aware of the values that you're giving. And hopefully then giving you a little bit more control, because super ego doesn't want you to have any control. The ego wants to balance the control for getting enough for you and giving enough to the world around you. But superego, the conscious thing, says, yeah, but what about everybody else? And it's constantly weighing up what's in it for them and almost sort of doing away what's in it for you. And this jousting, this kind of debate, this kind of ongoing stuff happens with every single behavior that you have, every single choice that you make. It's ongoing every day, millions and millions of times a day, without you even noticing. So the ideal here, if we choose to go on this journey of self-reflection, is it's building upon the benefits of being empathic, understanding, the impact of us on others. It's about being self-aware. It's about clearly communicating within ourselves and getting a real clarity and focus and a confidence in all of the decisions that we make and the behaviors that we do, by knowing that this stuff is going on. Okay, so we have the id, ego, superego. We know that we've got this kind of sense of self, and we know that we've explored self-esteem. In other words, the amount of value we're giving out to others in the world around us. So we've got the basic building blocks here to be able to do this thing called self-reflection. Okay, now there's some techniques coming up in a moment that I'm going to share with you, but you're already doing this. To be honest, if you stop and think about it just for a moment, you're already doing it. You are already self-reflecting. And whether you like it or not, it's already happening. And Lazarus theory, developed by Richard Lazarus some time ago, states that, you can't have an emotion or some kind of, physiological arousal in yourself without a thought coming first. In other words, you must think about your situation before you can experience any kind of emotion. So just a little example here. Imagine in work, for example, your boss, your line manager says to you, okay, what I want you to do is I need you to go into that conference room. There's 500 people in there, and I want you to go and do this presentation for me. Now, if you just go into that conference room and you give the presentation without any thought at all, you can't feel nervous. You won't get a heart rate increasing. You won't feel breathless. You won't be thinking and catastrophizing all the things that could go wrong, or whether you'll forget your place in the presentation and, just literally freeze. It can't happen without a thought. So you are already thinking and self-reflecting the what if scenario. You're already jousting between your id, the survival mode, and your ego, and the superego, which says, I need to give this amazing presentation for everyone else. And your ego says, yeah, but what if it goes wrong? And you get this kind of debate going on in your mind. You're already doing it. Unless you live in this absolutely Zen state 24/7, you are already self-reflecting. But what you possibly aren't doing is actually realizing how and why you're doing it. So one of the very, very first things that you can do as you start to think about self-reflection is maybe even try talking to yourself out loud. Because when you hear yourself saying things and actually saying, well, why, Neil, did I do that? Why, Neil, did I make that choice? You start then self-coaching. And, when somebody already says to you, if you've done something, they say, listen to yourself. You're going on and on and on about this thing. Actually, what they're doing is giving you great advice. This is about listening to yourself. So if you start to talk out loud to yourself, it isn't a sign of madness, and that, it is a very, very good technique that you can use. So it is a very, very strong thing, because as soon as you start replaying, and that is the first step to self-reflection, as soon as you start replaying the why within the behaviors or the thoughts, you start to get a really, really strong reflection on the choices and behaviors that you've made. So let's talk about choices just for a moment. We're going to split up choices and behaviors, and then we'll get into the techniques. So let's talk about self-reflecting on your choices. The first thing we need to understand is with every single choice that we make, no matter how small or large, and this applies to you throughout your day, every single day of the year, every single year of your life, there's a consequence. Okay, so there's a consequence for each and every choice you make. Empowerment, though, comes from realization of the values, filters, and information you use to make those choices. So let's think about that for a moment. If you are aware of why you're making the choices you're making, the quality of your choices goes up, but the empowerment that comes from making those choices from a strong baseline also increases. In other words, you're not making choices for somebody else. You're not making a choice that is, despite you. So it's not all about the superego, just looking to please, looking to sort of feel recognition, that whole social thing that we talked about in the hierarchy of needs. It's about a significant balance here, and that's what we're trying to strike. So if you're aware of why you made those little choices and those big choices, not the what, so it doesn't matter what choice you made, it's the why. What were the motivations behind my choices? Then you stand a chance of being empowered and taking true accountability for every consequence that comes from those choices, because it was your choice. You can't put this off onto somebody else. We hear all the time, oh, well, I want to blame that person over there because I don't want to take the accountability. That is not strong choice and decision making. Your choices are your choices, large and small. The skill, though, comes from reflection of the why. And here's a nice little one. It's a contentious one, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to go there anyway, without judgment, as always. Think about, how did you decide about your COVID-19 vaccination status? All decisions are based on either love or fear. Okay, so how did you decide? I'm not going to say anything's right or wrong. I'm not going to tell you mine. It's all about, how did you decide? Reflect on that choice. Was it based on love or was it based on fear? Okay, so did you decide to get the vaccine, or are you still kind of undetermined, undecided, or are you vaccine free? Whatever the choice, reflect on the why you made the choice, not what the choice is. The actual choice itself, in this sort of self-reflection context, doesn't matter. It's reflecting on the why. What were my motivations? Because often we can find that most of our decisions are based in one or other of love or fear. Do I make decisions because I'm fearful? Do most of my decisions, actually, if I think about the why, it's because I'm trying to protect myself. Again, think about the hierarchy of needs. Are some of my decisions based on love? In other words, actually, on this continual journey, I make tough decisions because I'm trying to self-actualize. I'm trying to learn continually at the top of that tree. It doesn't matter where you are. Just being aware of where you are is what's important. And when it comes to those contentious decisions and choices, that's when you can really get to the heart of, what is it that's actually driving me here? Is it love or is it fear? No right or wrong, it's just what it is, but it's really interesting. And the choices also play over into behaviors. Every choice that we make is obviously going to have a consequence, but every behavior also has a consequence. Remember the butterfly effect, part of this whole chaos theory? Here's a nice little definition from fractalfoundation.org, which says this effect grants the power to cause a hurricane in China to a butterfly flapping its wings in New Mexico. It may take a very long time, but the connection is real. If the butterfly hadn't flapped its wings at just the right point in space and time, the hurricane would not have happened. This is chaos theory. In other words, what it says is that every single behavior that you choose to do will get a reaction. And it will. Newton's third law says that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In other words, and this is the simple language, you get what you give. Okay? You get what you give to yourself as well as to others. We often sort of think this is all about, third parties, other people at work and at home. If I'm nice, they'll be nice to me. Well, yeah, that is how it works. But it also works in self-reflection to yourself. In other words, if you're kind to yourself will be kind back to you. If you think of yourself as a bad person, you will become a bad person and you will behave in a bad way. It's not rocket science. This is very, very simple, basic human existence theory. Just think of yourself, if you're kind of going through today and you decide, right, I'm going to consciously smile and welcome and be just really nice and kind to everybody. As I'm driving in my car, I'm going to thank everybody. I'm going to give way to other people. I'm just going to be a really, really giving person. What do you think is going to come back your way? Well, some people would say, and again, probably based on fear, they'd say, oh dear, well, it's a bit too vulnerable. You're going to sort of set yourself up there because people will take advantage. But the people who really self-reflect and figure this out will say, well, you're going to get back exactly what you give. So you're going to have a great day. It works. It simply works. And in self-reflection on your behavioral choices, the skill is to practice what we call momentary reflection. Okay, momentary reflection. Before you do anything, okay, any kind of behavior, before you make those choices, a short pause. Don't just jump in. Don't just say it. Don't just decide. Just pause, just for a moment. This is self-reflection. Doesn't require meditation or anything like that. You can do this in every single moment if you choose to. And of course, choice has consequence. But the skill with momentary reflection is that if you pause before every action or behavior and consider these three things, you will then be reflecting in a really positive way to decide whether or not to do this behavior or action. The three things to consider are, is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? So think about this thing is, you find a little piece of information about somebody and you think, oh my goodness, I don't know whether to tell them or not. It kind of feels quite important, but the ego's now telling me, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's quite the right thing to do. What will they think of me if I tell them? How are they going to feel afterwards? I'm really not sure that I need to actually say this thing. Well, put it through the filter. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? If it fails one of those three elements of the filter, don't do it. Don't say it. But if it is true, and it really is necessary to them, and sometimes you have to be harsh to be kind because it's in their best interest, then tell them. So is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? That momentary reflection allows you at every point to be making really sound judgments. And this is self-reflection. It isn't just about getting into your meditation state. You can do this all day, every day. And of course, what we're seeing is this true self-reflection means that there really are no strengths and weaknesses. There just is what there is, and you are just who you are. But what it allows us to do is by becoming more self-aware, by becoming more adaptable and more kind of sort of savvy with what's going on, both outside us and within us, we can begin to add more value to the world around us. And that becomes really, really interesting as we start to take this thing forward. So I want to tell you 5 steps then for beginning to become more self-reflective. Okay, and you can experiment with these and play with these. There is no right or wrong. There is no kind of overall sort of league table here. There's nobody better than anybody else. They're just what there is. And this is self-reflection. So this is you comparing yourself to you being you, okay? All about ego here. So step 1 is identify your preferred learning style. And this will come important in a future step. So step number 1 is, are you somebody who really benefits from learning about things from an audio perspective, a visual perspective, or a sort of feeling, touching perspective, a kinesthetic perspective? So do you prefer to hear things, podcasts, for example? Do you prefer to watch things, videos, for example? Or do you prefer to kind of just get in there and start to kind of play with it and make it happen with your hands? That's kinesthetic. So just knowing that is a good starting point. And if you haven't even been down that journey, that's a very, very important first step. Step 2 for self-reflection is to figure out your preference for introversion or extroversion. Okay, so introverts, and you'll need to kind of decide which way you want to go with this one. Introvert preference is that they want to go it alone. An introvert would rather do self-reflection by themselves. So inwardly reflecting thoughts and feelings, kind of figuring it out from within inside. The extrovert preference will be the outward sharing of thoughts and feelings. In other words, I want to talk to somebody about this because I want to get a little bit of feedback. Now, if that's you, you don't want to go it alone. So you'll want to find a trusted other with whom you can experience this self-reflection and talk to them about. But the key word there is trusted other. Okay, this has got to be somebody who will not judge you, will not maybe even pass an opinion, but you just want them there as a little bit of a safety net to just kind of bounce some ideas around. So that's step 2. So figuring out your preference. Is it, I want to do this self-reflection internally, or do I want to actually do this with somebody else alongside me? Step 3 is what we would call, and I started this right at the beginning here, this cognitive behavioural self-therapy. Okay, I'm just going to take you through some of the steps here. So it's worth noting these down because this is quite important stuff now. So it's identify a challenging situation that makes you feel as though it deflates your self-esteem. Okay, it just kind of takes you back a few steps and you don't feel good about it. Don't focus on really what it is, but focus on your thoughts about the situation and your storytelling that then happens. In other words, what is it? Not the why, but what is it that I start to think about when I'm in that scenario or that situation? What are those stories that I tell myself? What do I project forward in? And then think about these things. Remember this whole kind of, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Think about, are those thoughts true? And of course, if you wouldn't say these kinds of things to somebody else, well, why are you saying these things to yourself? If you wouldn't storytell this to somebody else, well, why do you spend time and energy telling these stories to yourself if they're not serving you? The next bit would be, are your thoughts based on facts or feelings? You know, can you justify that this storytelling, these thoughts that you're having are actually providing value to you? Or are you just kind of making these things up and they're based on, you know, some hearsay or some, you know, possible interpretation from the past? Negative storytelling needs to be replaced with accurate and constructive thoughts. I'm not saying positive thinking. Sometimes it isn't about positive thinking, but accurate, constructive thoughts are vital here. And then be kind to yourself. Forgive yourself for telling these stories in the past. This, by turning the negative storytelling into constructive, accurate thoughts, and actually just being kind and saying, look, it doesn't matter. I know I've always done this, but I forgive myself for doing that. It's because I didn't know better at the time, but now I do. And always avoid the word should. Rephrase unhelpful language. That's really, really important. The should means that you're over-serving somebody else or another situation that's outside of you. And rephrase unhelpful language. Put things in a neutral to positive sense. Don't talk yourself out of stuff. And really important in self-reflection therapy is all about how do you feel in your body when these situations occur? But really importantly also, because this will give you a really interesting sort of sense of self, is where do you feel these feelings? You know, where in your body? It might not be the obvious places. It might not just be your heart rate goes up and you can't breathe and obviously heart and lungs there. It could be that you feel, you know, the weight of the world on your shoulders, for example. It might be that you feel that your legs are kind of feeling a little bit twitchy and it's the kind of fight or flight response. Understanding as you self-reflect the physical manifestation of these thoughts is a great way to kind of go inside and really begin to understand yourself. And then reflect on where do you intuitively want to start. Do you want to begin when you start to think about, actually, when I think about these things, do I want to start with the thoughts? Or do I want to start with my feelings? Or do I want to start with my behaviors? It doesn't matter. You can start anywhere because, as we know, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are in a loop. And all you have to do is just change one of them and you break the cycle. So if there's a thought that isn't serving you, figure out what the feelings and those behaviors or the physical manifestations of those thoughts are and break one of those three patterns in the loop and things will change. And then rephrase, reterm, retell those stories in a more appropriate, as I say, I'm not saying necessarily positive, but just a more appropriate way based on constructive thoughts and accurate descriptions. And then step 4, we can bring in the word meditation. So begin to meditate. And what I don't mean here is guided meditation. Again, I'm going to challenge that phrase like I challenged the word ego. I don't think there's anything that actually is guided meditation. That's not what meditation is. What we're talking about when somebody says, oh, I'm going to do a guided meditation, they mean they're going to do a guided progressive relaxation. A guided meditation is simply sitting quietly or lying quietly with yourself. So it isn't about listening to music and it isn't about, being guided through a script by somebody else. It's sitting quietly with yourself and it's noticing how your thoughts wander in your mind and how your heart feels, because you can listen to your heart too. And it's sitting with yourself just quietly and noticing what happens. As you do this more and more, you will notice that the gaps between your thoughts and that monkey mind, that chatter that we talked about, will increase. And you'll find that there's this beautiful space in between your thoughts and in between the feelings and in between how your body reacts, this wonderful nothingness. And it's in there that meditation and self-reflection really begins to happen, because ideas that will serve you may begin to sort of pop out from your subconscious. And even when you're very well practiced, you might be able to uncover some stuff that lies deep within your unconscious, that id area, and look and sort of delve deeply into your deepest motivations and values. But that's for another day. We can talk about it another time. But sitting and identifying with the why you are grateful for certain things, why your thoughts are coming up on that particular topic. It's always the why in self-reflection that is absolutely vital. So put away the apps and the music and the guided progressive relaxation, and simply sit quietly with yourself and see what happens. Notice your thoughts, notice your feelings, and notice the physical reactions. And step 5, the final step in building good sort of techniques for self-reflection, is building consistent daily habits. Take time out and away from the day-to-day every day. Keep a personal learning journal. When we say a personal learning journal, goes back to that first technique. The first step in the thing is, do you want to do this as an audio diary? Do you want to do this as a video? Record yourself telling yourself stories and watch them back if video is the way. Or you might want to pick up a pen and paper and keep a physical diary. And review your journal as though you're coaching another person. View it from outside of you. Once you've self-reflected, you want to come out and actually then look back inwards and work with your strengths. You can surround yourself with others who can cover your weaknesses. That's not the way to enjoy your self-actualization journey. It's about covering the weaknesses with others. You know, they can infill all of that stuff. Figure out your strengths, self-reflect on the why, and always use the filter. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And I'll leave you with one final thought, one final idea as we round up this session. And this would really be my top tip really for effective self-reflection. Self-reflection is quite simply remembering at every moment to be present in that moment. It really is as simple as that. That little momentary reflection before you choose something, or before you say something, or before you decide to choose a particular choice. Be present. Stop. Self-reflect. Why am I doing it? Not what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Because that in itself will allow you very, very quickly to get to a point where you can almost sort of decide that you are self-reflecting, and then really, really continue on that journey to, you know, great personal and professional fulfillment. So we've come to the end of this particular session, and hopefully you found there was some interesting little ideas and thoughts in there that you can go away and experiment with. Hopefully you did find that good. And we will be coming back, as I say, in a week's time for self-motivation, building on all of that self-reflection, all of the other stuff that we've done over sort of recent weeks in building this series of professional and personal development. And we're going to wrap it up with the big one, self-motivation, taking this whole thing to the next level. So I really do hope you'll join me in the final webinar of this series in 2021. We've got lots of big plans ready for next year, and we'll tell you all about those in the final session next week. So if you haven't already, I would recommend that you go over to marketingcollege.com/events to register. Thank you very much for coming along today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I will hope to see you at the same time, same place next week.